Stephon, the question of science and God is a very hot topic today. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of acrimony, a lot of people trying to bring the fields together, a lot of people trying to tear them apart. As a scientist, as a physicist, how do you look upon the question of God?
I think that there is. I definitely grew up in a strong, I want to say, spiritual religious community, but I also grew up in a diverse religious situation because some of my family were Christian, some were Muslim, some were Hindu.
Oh.
So and sort of having this sort of multifarious view on spirituality and God, question of God, was, at some level uncomfortable, but in hindsight a blessing, because I found that it was one of the things, that question about whether or not God exists or what is God, who is God, and all these questions, kind of led me to science, seeking truth through science and through the scientific method. And looking at other spiritual traditions and from around the world that actually approach that question scientifically. Like, for example, Buddhism is an example of that. But I also find that, the question itself, one of the things that we're learning in physics is that it could very well be that our minds itself, our capacity to understand things might just be ultimately limited. And so could God be sort of that, associated with something that we could never know, and we give it this word? Mm-hmm. This is a question. I would say that just like as a scientist seeking to understand the physical world and make sense of things and just being very curious about that, I'm likewise curious about, the more emotional things that affect me as a human being and affect the world around me. And let's face it, God, is, I think it's a very real question to ask, because there is so much suffering in the world. We're not permanent beings. There's a question of, for all of us, what lies beyond, when we leave our physical bodies, or where were we before we were born, these kind of questions. And I think that these are viable questions to ask, and they're real, they affect all of us. And I think we should leave these questions open, and we should embrace them. I think that we should have discourse and dialogue between scientists who may not want to ask those questions, and spiritual leaders. I know, like the Dalai Lama, for example, talks to neuroscientists. So I embrace it, and I think we should continue asking these questions.
Look, that's a very strong view, but some scientists disagree with that. They would say that to embrace those questions or to have a dialogue really is having a dialogue with mythology and with error and with systems of belief that are archaic and have led humanity in all the wrong directions. And so it would be a mistake to give a credibility to a faulty and old way of thinking, and that science is really the only way of truth.
I think there's a part, I definitely agree with a lot of that. But I also think that same critique could also be applied to scientists that think they know it all and think they know that science is the ultimate truth. So I think it applies to both. I believe in really trying to embrace an open mind as best as you possibly could, and to leave space, for that mystery. And but it doesn't mean, I think that in and of itself is a good check. It's a good check on fanaticism and fundamentalism that leads to these errors. Because I have one of the big problems that I've had with religion is exactly that. Everybody's God is different from everybody else's. It's like it's my God. No, it's my God. This kind of thing. But I thought there's supposed to be one God. So there's obviously some error there that's led to all these problems, and it's enough to make any sensible person turn their back on religion, right? So I think it's a challenging thing to truly embrace.